Welcome back. If you are just joining me, you are watching Daily Politics on Trust TV. Do well to follow the conversation across our social platforms on Facebook, Instagram, and watch us live on YouTube. And we are now joined by Professor Muktar Imam, a professor of international relations and diplomacy from the National Institute of Security Studies, NISS, here in Abuja. Prof, you are welcome to our studio.
Thank you, my pleasure.
The whole world is worried with the escalation of the fight between Iran on one hand, United States and Israel on the other hand. To contextualize it for Nigerians to really understand, is it about religion? Is it about nuclear? Or is it about the wealth in Iran?
Well, I think it's a combination of two of the factors you've mentioned. It's a combination of access for control over resources and dominance over the entire region, so to speak. And then, of course, it's also about geopolitics and, of course, regional politics as well. And you also have the issue of nuclear politics involved in that. Nuclear politics has become has always been a cardinal point, a central point around geopolitics. The control of nuclear material, nuclear access to nuclear armament, and so on, have become, issues of who should have access to what as far as international politics is concerned. So when we talk about international equitable of resources within the international system, nuclear politics unfortunately is not one, because there isn't an agreement as far as balance of power with regards to access to nuclear power or nuclear armament, or even the enrichment of uranium to a significant degree. And so this is what this conflict is centered around. But primarily, like I said, it's about control and dominance over the region and over geopolitics. Iran, on the one hand, after the fall of the Shah, and the Iranian Revolution in 1979, which brought in the reign of Ayatollah Khomeini, it became a thing of contest for the United States. Recall that every administration before that period was friendly towards Iran. Of course, a lot of United States presidents have visited Iran and vice versa under the reign of the Shah. And so the rise, to dominance of the Ayatollah Khomeini regime essentially brought a stop to the United States' control and dominance over the region. Because here you had a force which was a standalone force, which wasn't allied with the GCC countries. The GCC countries obviously had tilted more towards the United States. And so Iran, of course, Iraq, to some degree under Saddam Hussein, was perceived as the axis of evil, and Syria, of course, included as well. The reason was because Iran was beginning to rear its head as an emerging contending power within the region, opposing the dominance of Saudi Arabia as the de facto superpower within the region. And that created problem for the United States, because they needed an ally that they could trust within the region, an ally by trust, an ally that will extend their frontier of control and access to energy resources, of course, oil and gas. And, from that period, it became a thing of contest. Every president thenceforth began to see Iran as a threat. And, of course, the outpost of the United States in the Middle East, Israel, took Iran as its number one enemy, because obviously it's the only power that has the military capabilities to be able to withstand any threat, either from Israel or from the United States, at least perceived up until now.
Israel is 1,789 kilometers away from Iran. And if you go to US, is over 6,100 or 7,000 kilometers away from Iran. They tend to be fixated with it, and Israel has nuclear, America has nuclear, North Korea,
right,
and all that.
Pakistan.
Why can't they allow Iran to also have its nuclear?
Well, you see, the thing is, like I said, international politics, one of the most sensitive resource or arm that the world has ever known is nuclear. It is sensitive, and it essentially gives any country who possesses it the powers to, beyond just the military capability, to enrich itself militarily. It gives you power over manufacture. It gives you power over virtually all sectors. It's a very powerful tool. A very small example will be the establishment of the gamma irradiation facility here in this country along the Shedder Science and Technology Complex. Nigeria has the second largest gamma irradiation facility right there. Now, when you look at that facility, you would imagine if we had the source, the nuclear source that requires you to run that facility, the level of freedom, the level of leverage that will avail us. If you contextualize this in figure terms, you would see that it will give us significant access to forex. It will place us, at par with countries that have access to that resource, and therefore the United States sees, access to this resource as being something that should be controlled greatly, not just by the United States, but by the United States and her allies. And so where a country like Iran that stands opposed to the ideals of the United States is rising along that line, it becomes a threat to the United States. Mind you, this is a pretext upon which the United States is trying to come into Iran and ensure that it annihilates Iran, it destroys Iran in the terms of the United States president. But the reality is it goes beyond that. Because when you go into history, you will see that under the reign of Dwight Eisenhower in the 50s into the 60s, of course he left office in 1960, Eisenhower as the president of the United States was the one who single-handedly took the capabilities, the nuclear capabilities, and handed them to Iran. Because in his words, and he made this address in the United Nations, our allies should understand and know the importance of the capabilities that we have. So the United States literally introduced Iran into the sphere of
when the going was good.
Absolutely, when the going was good, when the relationship was
about
with
the time much later when Iran and Iraq,
Yeah, absolutely.
The US supported Iran.
As a matter of fact, this started when Mohammed Mossadegh, the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister decided to nationalize the oil assets in Iran, to say it belongs to the country. This was where the fallout started from. And the United States wanted to ensure that its sphere of control and dominance continued, and it needed to place the Shah and continue to retain the Shah in office. And then, of course, the Ayatollah Khomeini revolution came in '79, which ousted that. So this, the argument around Iran and nuclear armament is a pretext for that entry. Reason is this, because we need to contextualize the conversation for the audience to understand where this is coming from. Every known international organization, including the IAEA, which is the body saddled with the mandate, Atomic Energy Agency, which is the UN organ, saddled with the mandate and responsibility of ascertaining and certifying any country that intends to join the nuclear race, that is to say, enriching uranium for whatever purpose. The IAEA becomes your supervisory body. And so it has not told any, there has not been any revelation from that body or any other body for that matter with regards to the enrichment of uranium in Iran to the level of nuclear armament or nuclear capability. That record is nowhere. What we've heard from the Director General of the IAEA was that after the bombing which Israel, carried out in Iran, it became difficult for them to access the nuclear facilities of Iran, especially in regions like Isfahan. That was the only complaint that came from the IAEA, and this is a very recent phenomenon. Right from the days of the JCPOA, the 5+1 countries put together and, of course, chaired by the United States under Barack Obama when John Kerry was Secretary of State, the conversation was around opening up the nuclear capabilities, the nuclear infrastructure of Iran to the IAEA, so that way they can have absolute control over what happens in Iran with regards to the enrichment of uranium. This was where the conversation was until Trump came about. Now, the coming of Trump essentially escalated the matter. However, the Iranians were still ready to return back to the negotiating table as far as the conversation around nuclear enrichment is concerned. And of course, this is what has snowballed into the meeting which was going on, still perhaps is going on in Oman, chaired by the Omani government to, mediate between the United States and of course Iran with regards to nuclear enrichment or uranium enrichment to nuclear capabilities, which the Iranians have denied till present day. They have denied, and there is no record. There is no report that states otherwise. And of course, this conversation was ongoing on the one side, whereas the agenda pushed and put forward by the Prime Minister of Israel over the years has been to annihilate, just go in there and take out Iran. Iran is the axis of evil, we don't care. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made a lot of conflicting statements. He has probated and reprobated in Washington, in Congress, with regards to Iran having nuclear capabilities. And none of these has ever been proven.
Now, as you said, of course, there was an ongoing meeting at the weekend in Switzerland, right? At the instance of Oman, Iran, US were there when suddenly they now launch sporadic attacks on Iran. Could that be betrayal? And as a professor of diplomacy, I didn't hear, a critical condemnation yet on this betrayal. I don't want to say it, but maybe you will say it as a diplomat or somebody who understands diplomacy. Meeting ongoing here, and then suddenly you went and attacked an independent country.
It is no doubt a betrayal of international legal systems. It is no doubt a contravention of the international rule-based order. It is no doubt a disregard for the respect for the sovereignty and independence of Iran as a sovereign entity. And of course, it speaks to the moral and, the moral, if you like, fabric of the international system today. It tells you that even where, as a matter of fact, it calls to question the very essence of the United Nations and the international rule-based system. Because where conversations are had, and by the way, you see, this was about the same thing that happened during the period of the First World War. While meetings were ongoing in Switzerland and these countries called themselves together to have a conversation, their armies were readied at home. And it was part of the reason why the League of Nations failed and part of the reason why the United Nations was established, to ensure that a repetation of this sort of scenario does not happen again. And here we are, we see a flagrant disregard for international norms and international rules, which were established by the forebearers of those in the West, but namely the United States. So it is quite pathetic. It is disheartening to see that this sort of trajectory has continued, where unilaterally one country or one government decides who stays and who should be removed, regardless of the consequences that is going to have. Because what we're witnessing now will have and is already having multifaceted consequences across the region. And it is going to invariably affect the entire world in terms of economy, in terms of security in itself. And so where conversations are being had, leading to a breakthrough, and the breakthrough is a problem for a regime or an administration in Washington, it begs to question, why do we have the United Nations? Even though this is a bilateral decision and a unilateral decision, of course, because what Israel is doing as an ally, as an outpost of the United States in the region. But we should condemn this in totality, because it is, regardless of the reaction that this has sparked, it is the action that we must first of all look at. You know, because, I mean, you don't expect the Iranians under existential threat to fold their arms and do nothing to safeguard themselves. And so we're beginning to witness a retaliation on the basis, on various bases that the United States has within the region, further, you know, intensifying the existing confrontation between Iran, which has always been isolated within the region, and the GCC countries. So this act is absolutely condemnable. It proves that the United States and Israel, of course, are not after the breakthrough in the diplomatic, across the diplomatic
that wasn't
channel.
there.
No,
they have made up their mind.
As a matter of fact, the reason why this attack was launched was because there was a breakthrough around the diplomatic conversation.
And they don't want it.
No, they wanted a breakdown. And so because they did not get what they wanted, they decided to launch the attack in the middle of the conversation, which is uncalled for and unnecessary. You cannot, on the basis of whatever intelligence you have or lack of intelligence, take out a regime, a legitimate regime in the country under the pretext of whatever. On the guise of nuclear armament or under the guise of nuclear armament, we've talked about that. There is no proven evidence that that country has nuclear armament. So we're seeing a literal reputation of Iraq right before our very eyes, and the international system and the international community is quiet about it. People have refused to condemn the aggressor.
Now, you have countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Jordan, and all that. Some are even saying the retaliation by Iran, you know, is unprovoked. Do they have justification to say that? Because Iran said, if not for the basis that you allowed US to have, you know, in your countries, what we are witnessing now wouldn't have happened. I said it earlier, 7,000 miles away. So what is your take? Do they have justification to complain?
Well,
because you can see the barrage of attacks
absolutely
on Saudi Arabia, you know, part of it, you know, UAE, Jordan, and all that.
Well, this is where the issue becomes slippery. This is the slippery slope around diplomacy. This is the hypocrisy, if you like, around diplomacy. This is where the conversation becomes intracted. Because as far as the morality of this conversation is concerned, then the reality is nobody has a right to point an accusing finger at Iran for retaliating against the United States through its allies. If you allow a country to put a base in your country, it means you're an ally of that country. And so when the heat comes, expect to take part in it. 3 reasons have helped to avert the Third World War. One of them is what we call the mutual assured destruction, and that is where this conversation can be literally situated. Mutual assured destruction speaks to the fact that you will be assured of the destruction if you use any kind of lethal force in engaging in warfare. However, it doesn't exclude countries that are allied with country A or country B. And so therefore, within that context, it is not unexpected for Iran to try to defend itself by hitting or targeting base or bases belonging to the United States domiciled in any of these Gulf countries. And mind you, when the threat came from Washington, when the last attack that came from Israel to Iran, which Iran of course retaliated, the leadership of Iran made it very clear that should the United States get involved in the war, which at the time was ongoing between itself and Israel, it will not spare any of the bases of the United States within the region. Yeah. This was made clear. And these are part of the agreeable perimeters within the rules of engagement in war. And what we're witnessing currently is a war. So it is either these Gulf countries will decide to align with the United States and form an allied force and fight Iran, or I think they should just totally shut their mouths up and watch as the events unfold, even though they have become consciously or subconsciously a part of the ongoing conflict. But as far as the complaints coming, I think These countries have a right to retaliate if they choose to do so. Of course, it's an ongoing war. However, we will call for caution. We will call for monitoring the situation and ensuring they try to de-escalate as much as they can. Qatar today prides itself to be the next peace destination of the world, trying to take over what Switzerland used to be. So along that line, I would urge that these countries ensure that they align their position with the international rule-based system and invoke whatever charters or articles within the United Nations will bring the warring parties to back to the negotiating table, because that's where they were before the escalation started. However, on the moral basis of this, I think it is unfair for the Gulf countries, or any country for that matter, not to first of all condemn the aggressor. It is very important, if not anything, for the optics of it. It is symbolic that you say XYZ country has carried out an attack against you. We quite understand, and it is uncalled for, it is unnecessary, and it is, arbitrary. However, an attack on us shouldn't be justified. Then the world might understand. But as far as the rule-based system is concerned, I do not see how Iran has done anything that opposes the rules of engagement in war.
Why are the Gulf states aligned to the US instead of Iran? Is it because, these are Arabs, these are English, Americas. Then here you have the Persians, right? The Iranians.
Right.
It beats imagination that, okay, I rather align with someone from
far
the West.
From the Atlantic.
That someone that, okay,
is
maybe remotely, this is my neighbor, in terms of even, closeness of culture and civilization, religion and all that. Why do they also see Iran as a threat? Is it that maybe it will become a bully ultimately by the time it's able to establish and assert its influence in the Middle East?
Well, you see, international politics looks beyond religion, it looks beyond ethnicity, it looks beyond culture. It looks to what politics, whether domestic or international, places first as a priority, which is interest, incidentally. And that's the reason why often at times you hear people talk about synonyms for diplomacy has been hypocrisy, because you must ensure that your national interest and your national objectives are achieved first.
All the time.
Before anything else. There's no morality in politics, especially international politics, unfortunately. This is where we are. This is an unfortunate reality confronting us today. And wherever you take morality out of any phenomena, you will end up with a problem. And that's the reason why the world is suffering the fate which it is suffering today. Because we have aligned with people who have hypocritically told us that, look, align with liberalism and ensure that you align with the international rule-based order and there will be peace. No, these are the same instigators of wars around the world. After the use of nuclear in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I don't think anybody else has. And the United States still today, even though Barack Obama haphazardly tried to, make an excuse for the United States, have not apologized to the world for the use of that very sensitive material in decimating the people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Until today, the consequence of that, or the impact of that, is still being felt in that country. Children are still being born without limbs, some with half nose, as the consequence of that act in 1945 or 1948. So, people who pride themselves to be the custodian of international rule-based system are today going against that very same moral compass which they have. This region we speak about, when the region begins to sink, the United States is far off in the Atlantic or across the Atlantic, and nothing will affect it. And so these Gulf countries need to sit back, have conversations around how to realign. For years, Saudi Arabia was at loggerhead with Iran, not for any other reason, but because of dominance, but because of power. It has never been about piety. Nobody there cares about piety. It's always about power. Is at the central nerve system of the conversation that we're having here. That is all about control. Who dominates?
I don't know whether you read the grapevine out there that Saudi, through the Crown Prince and then Israel, they mounted pressure on Trump to actually launch this latest attack. Do you agree in that theory?
Well, that's a theory, and as far as international politics is concerned, there's very little you can dismiss.
Anything can happen.
Absolutely. Even where we saw that relationships between Saudi Arabia and Iran was almost beginning to take a shape as a result of the intervention of President Xi Jinping of China. However, things could deteriorate. 24 hours is a lot of time for politics to change. The dynamics within it can take a
collaboration.
The only thing that we can actually leverage on or take advantage of, the viewers will have to forgive us, again, like we said, international politics is about interest, is that once the prices of oil shoot up and the movement of oil products dips down within that region, the rest of the world, Europe and other parts of the world, will look to Nigeria. But be mindful of the double-edged situation we're confronted with here. We're confronted with a situation where the corridor through which a chunk of this resource we are talking about has to pass through, and that place is under severe threat, because right now we have not yet heard a response for not just Nigeria but the continent to begin to think futuristic for itself. We're seeing a blatant disregard for international law, where one man decides who stays in office and who gets taken out, and he's doing it. He has done it in Venezuela, he's done it now in Iran. Who knows where he's going to
Some
next.
are even saying maybe Nigeria could be next, going by the way he's encroaching into the territory, asking Nigeria to do A, B, C.
However, you see, there's very little you can rule out in international politics, especially one that doesn't have a moral fiber. And here we are. The moral backing of the international system is broken completely, and nobody is talking about what should be talked about morally.
Okay, finally, Prof, in 1 minute, do you think Iran ought to have acted differently? Because look at it, its key leaders, in less than 1 hour, all of them wiped out.
Yeah, I think there was a defect in its strategy. At a time where you are under the radar and under the surveillance of a country that is much more sophisticated than you militarily, I think it was an unwise decision for all the leaders to have converged in one place at the same time. It wasn't wise. However, banking on the fact that there's an international rule-based order, the assumption would have been maybe the United States will not strike. But nonetheless, Trump had made it clear. The USS Gerald had moved very close to your shore. So it was obvious that Trump, being who he is, would have acted arbitrarily anyway. So I don't think that was the best strategy to have carried out at the immediate instance of what had transpired. Nonetheless, I don't know what else Iran could have done other than having diplomatic exchanges and trying to explore the diplomatic channel, which is what they did and are still trying to do and are still ready to do. If you listen to the foreign minister of Iran, he said if the bombing stops and the shelling stops and a rational explanation is given, we are ready to return back to the negotiating table. So I don't know what else Iran could have done in this instance. With regards to bombing bases in the Gulf states, well, that was an expected scenario.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Muktar Imam, International Relations and Diplomacy from the National Institute of Security Studies, NIS, for your informed perspective on this serious matter. We have to have you some other time.
My pleasure.
And viewers, thank you very much for being with us. And that's a wrap on today's package. We thank our other guests that featured on the program. Join us tomorrow for another interesting edition. From here, I'm Hamza Idris. Good night.